Rotation in the Pokemon TCG is coming soon, and I want to help you prepare. I've already made post-rotation previews for Charizard and Gardevoir, and today we set our sights on what Dragapult looks like post-rotation. I'm Jeff from InThirdPerson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about Dragapult EX and what it looks like in the post-rotation format. In order to get an idea of what Dragapult looks like, we're going to be looking at tournament deck lists from Japan. Right now, over in Japan, they've already had their rotation, and they're a couple of days into what their post-rotation format looks like. So we're going to be pulling some of the best lists from over there. Now, keep in mind that the format is pretty young, so I wouldn't necessarily look at these lists and say, like, this is the exact 60. There will be optimizations that happen along the way. I would use this as a guide for directionally, this is where Dragapult is going, so that you have an idea of what way you want to upgrade your deck. And there will be updates towards our rotation, and I will do a big roundup video right before our rotation occurs so you can see how all of the decks shape out. And if you want to see all of the Dragapult lists yourself, I've only got a couple here, and there are dozens that are on Limitless. Hit the link in the bottom paragraph there, and you can check them all out yourself. Dragapult loses some pieces, but it doesn't get hurt nearly as bad as some other decks. Radiant Alakazam does suck to lose because you can make some really awesome plays happen by moving damage counters around, but in the grand scheme of things, not that big of a loss. You still have an amazing attack, you still have a draw engine with the Dracloak, and most of the core pieces are intact. Losing Rotom and Lumineon and that Forest Seal Stone combo, which I don't have a picture of Forest Seal Stone here for some reason, is kind of annoying, but again, not necessarily the end of the world. And even Lost Vacuum and Temple of Sinnoh and Manaphy are even smaller pieces that, yes, it does sting to lose those, but at its core, Dragapult is still incredibly strong. So strong that in the early days of the post-rotation meta in Japan, it is the big bad of the format. This is Pokébook's tier list where they go through all of the City League tournaments in Japan and then compile the representation of each deck in the top 16, and Dragapult is currently on top, representing 20.6% of all decks in top 16s in their tournaments. When Pokébook filters it even further down to the top 4 deck lists, Dragapult slips just a little bit and Raging Bolt slides into that number 1 spot, but regardless, Dragapult is absolutely a force to be reckoned with, a deck that can get you top 16, a deck that can get to top 4, and has won a number of tournaments in Japan already, and I suspect that Dragapult is going to be one of the decks to beat once rotation happens internationally as well. I think one of the big benefits to Dragapult is that it really doesn't change all that much. Yes, you can notice on this list we don't have the Lumineon and the Rotom and the Forest Seal Stone, but in the grand scheme of things, this looks like a Dragapult list we can play right now. There's actually no new cards on this list. We've got our Dragapult line, our Dusknoir line, a couple of Badoos to item lock our opponent for a little bit while we set up, and then all of the trainer cards are things that we already have in the format. You probably, if you're a Dragapult player, you probably have all of these cards, and you kind of just take out the Lumineon and the Rotom and then make a couple tweaks here and there to your counts, maybe tech in the TM Evo and Devo, which may or may not have already been there, and then you're kind of good. So you're just taking out a handful of cards and you are still cooking, and arguably Dragapult rising even higher just because of the way that the format's shaking out, even though you're technically weaker than you were pre-rotation. Here's another example of a Dragapult and Dusknoir list with a little more spice to it. We do see a Mela and Jacques squeak in there. Mela attaches a fire energy while also drawing cards. Jacques gets you 2 evolution Pokemon, but the big tech here is Clefairy EX. Well, Lily's Clefairy EX to be exact. It is a basic Pokemon with 190 HP, and it has a couple of big benefits in the Dragapult deck. For one, it's got that full Moon Rondo attack where for a Psychic and a Colorless does 20 damage and 20 more damage for each bench Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. This will cap out at 220 damage to the active, which is a little higher than Dragapult's 200 normally. And if Area 0 Underdepths is in play, which there's a much higher chance of that happening as more decks adopt Area 0 Underdepths, this actually becomes an incredibly potent attacker. On top of that, Lily's Clefairy EX has the ability Fairy Zone, where the weakness of Dragon-type Pokemon in play is now Psychic-type. So now you can hit other Dragapults for weakness, and this is really awesome tech in that Dragapult matchup, especially when Dragapult can't one-shot a Dragapult. Lily's Clefairy can. And if you can combo this with Crispin, where you can attach an energy to that Pokemon and also have another one in hand, you can get Lily's Clefairy rolling as early as turn 1 going second, though you're probably not going to do that in the Dragapult Mirror match. But the fact that you can get this rolling in one turn with a Crispin and one-hit KO a Dragapult is amazing. This particular build of Dragapult doesn't include Lily's Pearl. This is a tool card that Lily's Pokemon can attach to themselves, whereby when they get knocked out, they drop one less prize. I can understand not having the room in your deck list for Clefairy to have this as a one-of tech option, especially when you're like, I don't know if I'm going to have the Clefairy and the Pearl at the same time. But if you can squeeze it in here, I think it's a really nice tech, because Lily's Clefairy being able to one-shot multi-prize Pokemon while also only dropping a single prize itself is awesome. Dragapult Gholdengo is a deck that has gotten popular in recent weeks due to its very strong showing at the Japan Championships. We are still using Dragapult as our primary attacker, but we now get Gholdengo EX as another way to draw cards. We can draw a card with that coin bonus ability, or two cards if we've got Gholdengo in the active spot. We can also use it as an attacker with that Make It Rain attack. Though primarily we want to use Dragapult more often than not, Gholdengo can be brought in as a heavy hitter with the potential to one-hit KO multi-prize Pokemon, which is something that Dragapult can struggle with from time to time. Monkey Dory is a really nice tech here, which allows you to move 3 damage from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. In particular, after you take a hit, you can use Monkey Dory to potentially take out a Badoo on the opposing side. Squawkabilly also makes its way into this list, letting you discard your hand and draw 6 cards. In particular, this probably helps Gholdengo a little more, getting some extra energy in the discard pile so that you can recover it with superior energy retrieval later. But also not necessarily bad for Dragapult either, as you could draw further into your deck and potentially get the pieces that you need to set up. I actually like this variation a little more, where we have Gholdengo as the primary attacker and Dragapult as the support. That 4/4 line of Gholdengo gives you a lot of draw power, and also you can do a ton of damage with all of that energy that we have in the deck, and the Energy Search Pro being able to find it very quickly. And then from there, we have the Dracloaks as additional draw support, and we can manually build up a Dragapult EX as a sniper if need be. Dragapult Xatu is an archetype that hasn't been all that popular outside of Japan, and I have a hard time seeing it gain popularity post-rotation. But this is an archetype that does see a lot of play in Japan, and this one got first place. So let's dive into this one a little more, where we got to start with the Xatu here, which is the linchpin of the deck. It's got that clairvoyant sensibility, where once during your turn, you can attach a basic psychic energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. So you're probably most likely going to attach it to the Dragapult, but you could attach it to some other targets in this deck as well. And when you do that, you get to draw 2 cards. So having a energy acceleration option plus draw engine in Xatu is really nice. And besides attaching to the Dragapult, we can also attach to Lily's Clefairy EX. Again, we just talked about this card not that long ago. That full Moon Rondo attack can be very powerful. We also have Lily's Pearl in this particular build, so Lily's Clefairy only drops 1 prize when it's got it attached. And because we are hitting dragon types for weakness, we can potentially take out other opposing Dragapults with 1 hit thanks to Lily's Clefairy. Of course, this depends on how big the benches are, because Full Moon Rondo depends on bench size, but it should be pretty easy to one-hit KO a Dragapult with Lily's Clefairy. One more tech here, and that is Maractus. This is a new card from Journey Together. It has the attack corner, where for 1 colorless energy, you do 20 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. You can stall for time here, trying to trap something like a Squawkabilly in the active while you set up. I think the 20 damage might actually be a bit too high to the point where you can't just trap your opponent forever with a Maractus, but you also can just do decent damage chip while you get your Dragapult or your Lily's Clefairy set up in the back. And then its Bursting Needle ability states that if this is in the active and it gets knocked out by damage, you get to put 6 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon, softening them up for Dragapult or Lily's Clefairy to clean them up, or maybe even the Dusknoir or Dusclops to blow up and take them out later. Dragapult can also be played with Iron Thorns. This is something that players have been exploring since the Surging Sparks format, and it still works here to good effect. It still sees a little bit of play here and there in Japan, and this list is pretty vanilla. The only addition I see here is the Monkey Dory, which again can move damage from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. This can be a great way to deal with Badoos in particular. Otherwise, there's no new cards here, and this is something that you can build right now with the current card pool. This second take on Dragapult Iron Thorns is a little more teched out. We've got the Hawlucha here for that flying entry, which drops a damage counter on 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon, giving you a better opportunity to potentially one-hit KO stuff like 70 HP Charmanders, for example. But there are a couple of other techs here as well. We've talked about the Clefairy to death at this point, but we also have a 1/1 for Farigiraf EX. And this is a walling Pokemon with that Armor Tail ability where you can prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon EX. This is going to help in certain matchups like Raging Bolt EX, which is a deck that is very popular in Japan's post-rotation format and also very successful. So giving you this walling option can either help your opponents, like slow your opponent down, or potentially just wall them off entirely, and you can win the game by just walling them off with Armor Tail. And especially since we're in a format that does not have Canceling Cologne anymore, this is going to be even harder for those types of decks to deal with. Dragapult Charizard is a combination players have also been playing with for a little while now, and it still works in a post-rotation format. We do have that 4-4-2 line of Dragapult and then a smaller line of Charizard, but otherwise this deck list looks largely the same. Not really any new cards or any notable things to speak of. You can kind of use Dragapult or Charizard as an attacker. I like Charizard hitting the active generally a little stronger. Meanwhile, Dragapult gives you that snipe option. This second take on Dragapult Charizard is a little more teched out. One of the first things that stood out to me was the inclusion of Blood Moon Ursaluna EX. This is kind of taking that Radiant Charizard spot where you have this really big attack you can just whip out towards the end of the game for little to no energy. That Blood Moon attack, it has a crazy expensive cost, but that goes down by 1 for each prize your opponent has taken thanks to that season skilled ability. Now, the problem with Blood Moon Ursaluna versus Radiant Charizard, it does do slightly less damage, which I'm not that concerned about. 240 to 250 doesn't really change any breakpoints, but the fact that Blood Moon Ursaluna is a 2-prize Pokemon makes it a little harder to use towards the end game, because if you don't end the game with Blood Moon Ursaluna, you now leave your opponent with a 2-prize Pokemon that, granted, it is hard to take out at 260 HP, but you could cost yourself the game with Blood Moon Ursaluna kind of floating in the active and getting KO'd for 2 prizes. So I don't necessarily hate its inclusion here for having that utility attacker towards the end game that's really low maintenance to set up, but it does have its flaws as well. Another notable inclusion here is Maximum Belt. This is an A-Spec that I've always really liked, but it hasn't always been the most useful because we've been in formats that still have Pokemon V in them. But now that we're entering a format that only has Pokemon EX, I suspect that Maximum Belt is going to be used even more. And I really like it in this deck because it pushes our damage output to hit new breakpoints for Charizard and for Dragapult. One more potential way of building Dragapult is with the new Blaziken. Now, this is a card that I think is coming out as part of Journey Together. I could be wrong. This originally came out as a card from a starter deck in Japan. I'm pretty sure we are going to get this at some point in the near future, though. So we're going to consider it here as a potential build option. Blaziken EX is a stage 2 Pokemon. Its attack is not that great for a fire and a colorless. You do 200 damage and you can't attack the next turn. However, its ability Overflowing Spirit has a lot of potential. Once during your turn, you can attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. And it doesn't state like it has to be fire energy, it could be any energy. So we could use this to help power up our Dragapult, we could use it to help power up our Clefairy that's in the deck. We could even use it to attach a dark energy to Monkey Dory so we can start moving damage from our Pokemon to our opponent's Pokemon. But getting another stage 2 setup in this feels a little scary to me, but it definitely is worth considering here, especially since this is a list that did get first place. So there is some potential in a Dragapult Blaziken build. And in general, I kind of want to see other decks that use this Blaziken card. And there we go. That is a look at Dragapult EX in the post-rotation format. I think that Dragapult benefits greatly from not really having lost all that much to rotation. No disrespect to Lumineon and Forest Seal Stone and Rotom V, but the core of what Dragapult is largely the same. And these post-rotation builds that are dominating right now are all with old cards that you can use right now. So it's very easy to just prepare your existing Dragapult deck right now for post-rotation play that would probably still do really well in the current format. So if you haven't started playing Dragapult yet, now's a great time to do so. And if you are playing Dragapult, then all signs seem to point to you having a great time in the post-rotation format. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at In Third Person. In particular, keep your subscribe to this channel, have the bell on for the notifications, because we're going to be doing a ton more post-rotation preview content in the coming weeks. Make sure to check out my Twitch channel at In Third Person, where I stream the Pokemon TCG every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.